When did the name Palestine first get applied to the region that is known as Israel, Palestine, Canaan, the Levant, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, and a host of other names? Did it start with the United Nations, the Romans, or does it go back even farther than that? You are going to want to stick around for this video. So come on, let's go dig. I'm Dr. Bob Cargill, the excavator, Associate Professor of Classics and Religious Studies at the University of Iowa. Thanks for watching. Excavator videos are sponsored by the Friends of the IAA, the Israel Antiquities Authority. Look in the notes below if you'd like to make a donation to the Friends of the IAA and help fund the very excavations that are going on in Israel today. Excavator is also made possible by JewishHistory.com. Make sure you check out all of the wonderful digital projects exploring Jewish history at JewishHistory.com. Excavator is also in partnership with the new online publication Bible and Archaeology, where you can get all of the latest biblical archaeology news and information online for free. So check out Bible and Archaeology and sign up to be notified about the latest articles, news, and daily Bible trivia as well. In today's video, we want to look at the origin of the name Palestine as it is applied to the geographical region of the Eastern Mediterranean up to the Jordan River, from Anatolia or modern Turkey in the north to Egypt in the south. I have received more emails, comments, complaints, and straight-up nastygrams regarding the use of the term Palestine when describing this region than just about any other topic, because the modern Israel-Palestine political situation is so emotional and volatile, even what you call the region causes people to get mad. And this is even when what we call it is rooted in historically accurate fact. So let me explain the facts that we have, and let me explain why using the word Palestine to describe this region is so politically charged. First, it is important to remember that I, as a scholar and a historian, like most scholars and historians, operate in multiple circles when referring to real places on the globe. What I mean by this is that I am a real person with real beliefs and political views, but I am also a historian that must, to the best of my ability, put aside my own personal opinions and teach historical facts, the archaeology, the literature, the science, of whatever particular topic I am teaching that day. This means that sometimes we scholars will refer to something that may be sensitive to some modern ears, but it does not mean that we are trying to be political or trigger any type of emotional response. Quite the opposite. We are trying to show the origins of the taboo or the situation that is causing all of the emotional turmoil. When we study history, it is not to assign blame to particular modern peoples. Rather, it is to cultivate an appreciation for the origins of a particular conflict or word or belief and look at the beginnings of that issue and then track that word or phrase or issue or system over time while examining how all sides, all different groups respond to it over time. This is the only way to see how we got to where we are today, to see how a word or belief or conflict got to be as bad as it is today. We look at history not to assign blame, but to learn to appreciate how things came into being and to begin to understand why people feel the way they feel. It's about understanding, not blame. To some, a particular word or symbol means nothing. Seriously, they may give it little, if any, thought at all. But to others, that same word or symbol may mean everything. Now, some will dismiss this as political correctness, but that's not what this is about. It's about understanding the origins of words and conflicts. Again, it's about understanding, not political correctness. Now, if you don't want to understand things, okay, that's fair. But I wouldn't be surprised if you were also opposed to other kinds of understanding, like science and logic and reason and simple math. What we do as historians is about understanding, not political correctness. And nowhere is this more true than with the word Palestine. So, whence comes the word Palestine? Whence, by the way, means from where. So it's a peeve of mine when people say from whence, as that is an incorrect use of the word, stolen from the Department of Double Redundancy Department. Just say whence, but I digress. Whence comes the word Palestine? Today, Palestinian is used to denote a particular type of person, but it is confusing because some people use it as a nationalistic descriptor, like French or American, while others use it to describe a person from a particular geographic region, namely Palestine. The reason for this is that the state of Palestine is only recognized by 138 of the 193 UN member states, and only enjoys non-member observer status in the United Nations, a status that it's only held since 2012. So because not every nation recognizes Palestine as an official state, and because in reality, Israel is in control of large portions of the land that Palestine claims as its state, the use of Palestine as a nationalistic designation is both confusing and immediately controversial, as use of this term in any modern nationalistic context is essentially a political statement. There is also the use of the word Palestinian as a geographic descriptor, that is, someone from the region of Palestine. Now, this too is often confusing and controversial because those calling themselves Palestinians may, in fact, be referring to themselves as Palestinian nationalists, that is, those who identify as citizens of the modern state of Palestine, typically of Arab descent, but not always, and typically holding to a Muslim or Christian religious tradition. And it's important to remember that some Palestinian Arabs are Christians, usually living in towns associated with the Christian faith like Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem. When Palestinian people refer to themselves as Palestinians, saying they live in Palestine, we can see where others may immediately perceive this as a political claim and respond with statements like, actually you live in Israel, or actually you live in the West Bank and the Palestinian territories because Palestine isn't a real country. And we're off to the races with the arguments and the Twitter trolling. And let's be very, very honest. This is a legitimate debate. When one person, typically of one ethnic background, tells another person, typically of another ethnic background, that you aren't who you claim to be, you can completely understand how that might upset someone, especially if the reason there isn't a fully recognized Palestinian state is because Israel and the United States are largely responsible for that lack of recognition by working hard in the UN to block it. That debate, that controversy is a legitimate debate and should be had, but it is not the focus of this video. This video looks at the use of the terms Palestine and Palestinian to refer to the geographic region and those people who lived in it throughout history. That is, not in a modern political context, but as a historical, very non-political context. This is how many scholars, especially ancient historians and archaeologists, use the term Palestine, and yet it's still where many people, steeped in the political argument, criticize scholars for simply using the term Palestine because they have misunderstood what the scholar is saying. Specifically, many people don't realize that the word Palestine is much, much older than the modern Israeli-Palestinian dispute. So when did the word Palestine first appear to describe the eastern shore of the Mediterranean from modern Turkey in the north to modern Egypt in the south. The name Palestine is actually a corruption of the word Philistine, Peleshit in Hebrew, the name of a group of one of the sea peoples that landed in southern Canaan at the end of the Late Bronze Age, so about 1200 BCE. As the Philistines settled the coast and spread inland and northward, the southern coastal region came to be known as the land of the Philistines, and likely because they were on one of the major trade routes, the Via Maris, or Way of the Sea, and their Judahite and Israelite neighbors were inland, up in the mountains and off the main trade routes. The name Philistine came to be associated with the region, especially to outside nations traveling through the area. So Philistia became Palestina. When Pompey the Great, the Roman general, annexed Jerusalem in 63 BCE, and Rome later established the puppet Herodian kingdom of Judea in 40 BCE, they allowed their new Jewish subjects to keep the name of their kingdom, Judea. However, after Herod died, and after his descendants, especially Archelaus in Jerusalem, ruled so ineffectively, and following not one but two Jewish rebellions against Rome, the Great Revolt and the Bar Kokhba Revolt, the Emperor Hadrian renamed Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina in 135 CE and renamed the administrative province of Judea as Syria Palestina, because it was comprised largely of the two historical districts, Syria and Palestina. Now, there are many videos out there that claim that this was the first time that the name Palestine was applied to the region in 135 CE by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. But this is simply not true. Not only did the Romans not invent the name Palestine, but neither were they the first to use the term Palestine to describe the region in literature. And look, we're not talking by 5 or 10 years or even 50 years here. This honor, the first use of the term Palestine, actually goes to the 5th century BCE Greek historian Herodotus, who in 440 BCE, so over 500 years earlier, wrote in his epic chronicle, the Histories, the number of the triremes was 1,207, and they were furnished by the following. The Phoenicians with the Syrians of Palestine furnished 300. For their equipment, they had on their heads helmets, very close to the Greek in style. They wore linen breastplates and carried shields without rims and javelins. Those Phoenicians formerly dwelt, as they themselves say, by the Red Sea. They crossed from there and now inhabit the seacoast of Syria. This part of Syria, as far as Egypt, is all called Palestine. And the Greek word here is Palestine. This part of Syria, as far as Egypt, is all called Palestine. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote that in his Histories, Book 7, Chapter 89, over 500 years before the Romans named the region Syria-Palestine. So it wasn't the Romans. The land had been called Palestine for a long, long time. Herodotus says elsewhere in Histories, this is Book 1, Chapter 105, and when they were in the part of Syria called Palestine, remember, this is the 5th century BCE. Now, the Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, and again, this is at the end of the 1st century CE, before the Emperor Hadrian. Josephus confirms the Greek account when he writes in his Antiquities, 1:136, for the Greeks call part of that country Palestine. And he writes again in Against Appian, 1:171, this therefore is what Herodotus says that, quote, the Syrians that are in Palestine are circumcised, quote, referring to himself and the Jews. Josephus clearly knows that the Greeks have referred to the region, known alternatively as Israel, Judah, and Canaan, for hundreds of years, because he writes again in Antiquities 8:262, "No other of the Syrians that live in Palestine besides us, the Jews, alone, are circumcised." This is clear evidence that the region was called Palestine from at least the 5th century BCE, as even the Jewish historian Josephus himself cites a reference from Herodotus, and specifically to the Jews of the region as living in Palestine. So while Palestine may not have been his designation of choice for his homeland, Josephus openly and repeatedly recognized that others, namely Greeks, called the region Palestine, and had done so since at least the 5th century BCE. And this is why the Romans called it Palestine, and for that matter, why the Muslims called it Palestine, and why the British and everyone else, including Jews, called it Palestine up until the establishment of the modern state of Israel. It's because the Greeks called it Palestine after the kingdoms of Israel and Judah had been destroyed, while the Persians named the province Yehud, closely resembling the name of Judah or Yehuda. The Greeks called it Palestine, and because the Greeks would later defeat the Persians and conquer the region, the name Palestine stuck. This is why scholars and historians and archaeologists commonly call the region Palestine when referring to this area during the periods following the exile on through the end of the Second Temple period. Yes, the Hasmoneans set up a small kingdom of Israel in the region for about 100 years, but the Greeks and then the Romans were still the dominant empires, and their names stuck. So when a scholar of antiquity refers to this region as Palestine, the scholar is not necessarily making a political statement, even if the person hearing the statement wants to hear the word Palestine in the nationalistic manner we discussed at the beginning. The scholar is simply using the term that the people of the time used to refer to the land, namely Palestine. Personally, I frequently refer to this region as ancient Israel, ancient Judah, Palestine, Syria-Palestine, Yehud, Samaria, Judea, Canaan, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, the Levant, all depending on the context of what I'm talking about. Simply using the name Palestine to refer to the land that today is the state of Israel, especially in a historical context, is not a political claim or a nationalistic claim for or against the states of Israel or Palestine. As scholars of ancient history, we're simply calling the land what the people of the time called the land. Now, let's clear up a few other errant claims while we're playing with fire here in this video. The first claim that we must dismiss, because I keep getting emails about it, is the idea that the name Palestine didn't exist until the United Nations started using it to describe the region in 1947. Clearly, this is not the case. The evidence we just discussed makes it clear that the UN only used the term Palestine because that was the term used to describe the entire region in antiquity. So no, the UN didn't make up the term Palestine. Next, we've already addressed the false claim that it was the Romans who applied the name to the region, and only did so after the time of Christ. While they did change the name of the province from Judea to Syria-Palestine, this is only part of the story. The Emperor Hadrian did name this Roman province Syria-Palestina, following the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE. But he only did so because Palestina was already an established name for the region. As we saw, the Greek historian Herodotus referred to all of Canaan as Palestine 600 years earlier. So the Romans didn't invent the name, they just applied an existing name to the region, and the name Palestine stuck until modern times. The next errant claim that some modern Palestinian leaders assert is that they are the descendants of the Philistines. This claim has subtle nationalistic undertones because the idea is that since the Philistines settled what is now Gaza around 1200 BCE, and the name Palestine comes from the name Philistine, Modern Palestinians must be their descendants. And because the Philistines arrived before or around the same time as the Israelite kingdom was established, they therefore have an ancient claim to the land as well. Unfortunately, this is a highly problematic claim because the Philistines, a group of the Sea Peoples that settled the southern coast of Palestine, were of some kind of Greek descent. They were from Mycenaean Greece by way of Crete. And while there are many theories about the precise origins of the Sea Peoples and the Philistines, the one thing we are sure of is that they weren't Arab. They were from somewhere in the Aegean Sea. Arab Palestinians, therefore, cannot be descendants of the Mycenaean or Greek Philistines that lived there 3,000 years ago. The Philistines lent their name to the region, and later, the Arabs that migrated to the region and settled there following the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem took the name Palestinian because they now lived in the land called Palestine. But that does not mean they are related to the Philistines. They simply took on the name of the region once they settled there. One claim we sometimes hear is that Jesus was a Palestinian. This is actually true. He was a Palestinian Jew. He was a Jew living in what the Romans called Judea at the time and what the Greeks called Palestine. So yes, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, but this claim is also sometimes used in a nationalistic manner to paint Jesus as a Palestinian in the modern sense. Jesus was Jewish, and he lived in the region called both Judea and Palestine. Another claim that we sometimes hear is that modern Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites, or specifically the Amorites, that lived in the region prior to the formation of the ancient kingdom of Israel. This is entirely possible, but it becomes a moot argument because any broad definition of Canaanite or Amorite that is extensive enough to include what are now modern Arabs must also include what are now modern Jews. So claiming descent from the Canaanites, whether it's provable or not, doesn't give modern Palestinians any advantage when arguing for an exclusive or the earliest claim to the land, because modern Jews can make the same claim. An offshoot of this claim is that modern Palestinians are the descendants of the Jebusites, mentioned in Joshua 15:63, Judges 1:21, and 2 Samuel 5. This claim is sometimes made because King David is said to have conquered the Jebusites in 2 Samuel 5, logically implying that the Jebusites were there in the land before the Israelites and the establishment of the kingdom of Israel. The problem with this claim is that there is zero evidence of any people called the Jebusites outside of the Bible. None. And the story of David's conquest of Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 5 is so archaeologically problematic that many critical scholars think that the Jebusites were either made up or were simply a local name for one of the Canaanite or Amorite families that controlled Jerusalem before it became the Israelite capital. That is to say, the people that would have been the Jebusites, if they actually existed, would have simply been Canaanites, or more specifically Amorites, living in the land. And as the same biblical story says, the Israelites would have been already living among them for some time. Furthermore, there is absolutely no way to trace ancestry from any modern Palestinian Arab back to a Jebusite because, as I've stated, there is no evidence of anything Jebusite other than their mention in the Bible. It's conveniently impossible to prove. So what did we learn? The name Palestine is indeed derived from the Philistines, who migrated to the southeastern Mediterranean coast from the Aegean and settled there. But the Philistines were of Mycenaean or Greek descent. We learn that the Philistines lent their name to the region a name that would be adapted and used by the Greek historian Herodotus to describe what many of us call the land of Canaan, or Israel, or the West Bank and Gaza, essentially the land between modern Turkey and Egypt. We learn that this name Palestinian continued to be used by both Muslims and Jews all the way down through the period of the British Mandate following World War I. And it was only with the formation of the modern state of Israel that modern Israelis began to call what had been called Palestine the modern state of Israel. We also learned that scholars of ancient history, like me, use all of these terms, and that when we use the word Palestine to refer to the region, we aren't necessarily making a political statement, regardless of how much you may want to make it into one. We're simply calling the land what it was called in antiquity. When we're referring to the kingdom of Judah, we say Judah and Judahite. When we're referring to the ancient kingdom of Israel, we say Israel and Israelite. I use the term Canaan when referring to the late Bronze Age, Yehud when referring to the former kingdom of Judah during the Persian period, Judea when referring to the early part of the Roman occupation, and Syria-Palestine when referring to the region after 135 CE. None of these names are political terms beyond the fact that they are describing ancient political realities, in antiquity. Like so many other things in life, it depends on context. But if you are someone who was triggered by the mere hearing of the word Palestine in reference to the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, then maybe this video will relieve that stress, show you the facts of antiquity, and help you to calm down and stop firing off emails telling me to stop calling the region Palestine. The truth is, it is both Palestine and Israel. And the sooner we can all come to terms with this, the happier and safer we will all be. And again, that's not a political statement. It's just facts and reality. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel, and ring that little bell if you want to be made aware of future excavator videos as they are released. And feel free to share this video with your friends. Until next time, I'm Dr. Bob Cargill, the excavator, wishing you everything the best.